Hey, good morning. This is Frank Morris with Clean Cities, Georgia. Welcome to the Autogas Answers presentation. We will be talking about autogas and how it is a clean, powerful, and affordable alternative fuel to your fleet. It's 10:01. I will give it just one more minute to let folks log in, and then we will kick off this webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Clean Cities Georgia website after the event. And those of you that have registered will receive a link to that location for the Clean Cities website as well to be able to find the presentation. So the slides that we present will be made available in that presentation. So you don't have to worry about trying to do screenshots, as some of us often do to try to capture information. But thank you for joining us on a Thursday morning, and give it just a few more seconds and we will kick this off and start with the presentations. And Rachel, how's that sound coming through to you?
Sounds great, Frank.
Thank you. Rachel and I will be monitoring the question section of the webinar to be able to answer questions. And we will take those questions as you submit them. We'll get to them at the end of the webinar, I should say. And so please feel free to add those to the question section while we're going, and we'll get back to those. And if we miss anything, make sure to let us know. But we appreciate you joining. So we will kick this off. I'm Frank Morris. I am the Executive Director for Clean Cities, Georgia. And Clean Cities, Georgia is chartered under the Department of Energy. And we've been around for 27 years. Was the first Clean Cities Coalition that was chartered by DOE. So we've got a little bit of history there, and we're glad to be doing well and being able to bring this presentation to you with a bunch of partners, with PERC, the Propane Education Research Council, and P-State Trucks, and Conger Gas, and Bluebird Bus, our sponsors and speakers today. So we're going to hear from those folks here in just a minute. I'll tell you a little bit about Clean Cities. As I mentioned, we're a DOE funded entity and nonprofit, and we are interested in promoting, and we're charged with promoting alternative fuels in the transportation space. So examples of those alternative fuels, of course, propane, natural gas, electric, ethanol, biodiesel, maybe hydrogen at some point. But we're certainly fuel agnostic when it comes to promoting these alternative fuels for transportation, obviously to improve our air quality and to create a platform where emerging transportation technologies can thrive. We also manage grants on behalf of fleets and communities that are able to win those grants. We support them, and we interface between the folks that are doing the work on the ground and the Department of Energy or EPA to administer those grants. So that's a little bit about us. Next slide, Rachel. The coalition strategies for us is that we're focusing on personal vehicles as well as light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles using alternative fuels. We focus on idle reduction measures and fuel economy improvements. We're actually managing a DERA grant right now. DERA is Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. So that is focused on idle reduction technologies. We support new mobility choices. We bring folks that have these ideas together with other interested parties, municipalities, and we share that. We like to be a convener of that information and bringing people together to share ideas. And then it's all based on, as I said, alternative fuels and renewable fuels in transportation infrastructure. So the board, and some of these folks you'll recognize from companies, great names here in Georgia that are board members. Ian Skelton is our board chairman from Atlanta Gas Light. We've got Rich McDonald from Georgia EPD. Bill Moore, you'll hear from him later, from Conger Gas. Mark Leuenberger from Cox Enterprises, and Sean Brady from MHC Kenworth, and David Jaskowski. And you'll hear from David in a minute as well from P State Trucks. So we've got some OEMs and the dealers that are supportive of Clean Cities. And then we've got some municipalities, Al Curtis, Cobb County Fleet Manager. They just opened up a new fleet shop for the entire fleet for Cobb County, which incorporates alternative fuel vehicles as well. And Rodney Dill from the Municipal Gas Authority. Robert Gordon's got a great alternative fuel fleet out of DeKalb and recognized for what he's doing in adopting alternative fuels. Glad to have Lincoln Wood from Georgia Power, Mike McDonald from UPS, and John R. Seidel representing the city of Atlanta. So broad spectrum of folks that represent end users, fuel providers, and OEMs, equipment providers. So a little bit about us, and we're an open membership. So if you're interested in joining, please get in touch with me. Next slide. So I'm now going to turn it over to Steve Whaley. He is the Director of Autogas and Business Development, and has got a great presentation to take us through. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Frank, I appreciate that very much. I appreciate you inviting us to participate and all the good things. And I knew that Georgia was the first coalition, but I had forgotten that. I've had the privilege of working with the vast majority of coalitions around the country in I guess about 40 of these programs in this last year of living in two-dimensional instead of three. But thanks for having us. We'll go ahead and kick this off. I'm going to be wrapping through some slides pretty quickly. So I don't intend for you to understand and comprehend and grasp all of these things, but it's mostly just to stimulate some questions for you that are going to get answered by my fellow panelists as they dive a little bit deeper into these things. But I'm going to do the overview of propane autogas. And that term autogas is what we use when we're using propane in a transportation application. So if you hear me say propane or propane autogas or just autogas, it is the exact same fuel that we're talking about that goes on the back patio to help grill your steaks and heat your home, and all the agricultural and off-road applications that we're doing in residential and commercial. But when we refer to it in the transportation sector for over the road, we call it autogas. But before we do that, and I'm so thankful that that Frank mentioned the fuel agnostic position that the DOE coalitions, Clean City coalitions take, because we're going to zoom out just a little bit, and before we dive into autogas, we're just going to kind of wrap our minds around what a successful alternative energy adoption is. In other words, if we want to displace something that is wildly successful and implemented today, what is it going to take to make that transition? Frank had mentioned that managing some DERA grants, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. So to reduce those diesel emissions, we have to replace it with something. So if you're up on top, how do you get there? So some of the criteria for making that happen is fourfold. We're going to talk about you have to be cleaner than what's being used today. It's just not going to be in the recipe of success if you're not going to replace something with something dirtier or not cleaner. So you have to reduce emissions. You have to be cheaper. If you're not cheaper, it's not going to be financially sustainable because people aren't going to pay more for something that they're already doing. It has to be cleaner, it has to be cheaper, it has to perform just as well with its horsepower, torque, and range, and all of those things, because we're not going to compromise on that performance. And then my favorite is you have to have a lot of this energy source. So whether you're talking about natural gas, propane, electric, hydrogen, biodiesel, all of these, you have to be cleaner, less expensive, perform just as well, and you have to have a lot of this energy source. So with that, let's just take a look and dive in. What does propane have to offer? And we have the most cost-effective energy source for reducing NOx, and we'll demonstrate that in some of the data that we're going to show. We boast not just the lowest total cost of ownership of any conventional or alternative fuel, but conventional fuels as well. We are comparable and sometimes even better in performance, and we'll talk about some of those things coming up. But my favorite part of that in the performance is we don't have to compromise on range. We can go just as far as what we're doing with conventional fuels. And then the last part, I like to brag just a little bit. We are the world leader in production of propane. We produced 28 billion gallons in the last recorded year in 2019. 9 billion we used right here in these United States, but we sent almost 20 billion gallons overseas. So my job and your job as attendees is to take a big bite out of that 20 billion gallons that we're exporting and use more of it right here in these United States. So what is propane? It is the exact same thing we talked about, that we cook with, that we heat with, in 48 million homes and almost 1 million farms, forklifts, and commercial mowers that Matt's going to talk about. So it's the exact same thing. We have two sources from where we get it: an organic source. That's the conventional way of through the processing of natural gases that we extract from our good old American soil here. And then we also have renewable sources. We're going to talk about that at the very end. But what's important is both of these sources, it's a non-toxic, it can't contaminate the air, soil, or water sources, and it's very, very efficient to use. So why are fleets choosing Autogas? Total cost of ownership, lower emissions. This is what everybody's going to be talking about today. And most importantly, from a fleet transportation director's perspective at the very end. But these are all those advantages that we're going to talk about. Now, everybody has a path to zero. When I'm talking about everybody, I'm talking about every fuel in transportation is striving for the holy grail of zero emissions. Now, none of us have achieved that yet because there are emissions in upstream, downstream, on the vehicle and everything else, but we're all striving to get as close to that zero as possible. Now, how has propane fared? We have done in the initial aspects of using propane in the transportation sector, because it's so clean to start off with, our particulate matter is virtually zero. So how that translates into fleet application, right now we use particulate matter filters on diesels to get rid of those particles, and we don't even need that on a propane engine. So we start off doing pretty well with particulate matter. NOx, the nitrogen oxides that are generated, are substantially reduced. Now, when we compare ourselves to the cleanest diesel out there with our best-in-class propane, both of them meet the CARB standards, the EPA standards for emissions. But if you did a real-world emission comparison, like University of West Virginia did, the same folks that busted Volkswagen for their NOx emissions, did a mobile study of two vehicles, the best-in-class clean diesel, the best-in-class propane, on a school bus, and did the same route, and they measured it while it was actually in operation, not just on the dynamometer in the lab. And they found that propane was 96% cleaner than that diesel. So we could get you way down the road on emission reductions right there at the tailpipe. But also greenhouse gases. We're going to talk about some new technologies that are reducing that substantially. And at the end, we'll do a little bit of a life cycle analysis. So fuel and maintenance cost reductions are big on the priority for why people are moving into propane autogas in their fleet. The blue line here indicates the stability of propane being consistently less than the red and green lines for gasoline and diesel. And one of the maintenance things, and I know Sam is going to talk about this a little bit in his, so I won't dive too far into it, but the propane engine doesn't have the diesel exhaust fluid. It doesn't have any of the after treatment that you see here that has to get replaced on a pretty regular basis for that diesel to meet the emission standards. The diesel engines to meet these standards are very expensive with a lot of components. And also the preventative maintenance for a propane engine is substantially less for oil changes and those oil filters and such. But on a preventative maintenance comparison, about $70 compared to about $270 for that PM cost to make it happen. And all this adds up. So what is the Autogas vehicle offerings that we have today? We are in virtually everything, but we do have a sweet spot. Law enforcement enjoys that very much. I remember the very first fleet that I worked with was in Jackson County, Georgia, and the sheriff there was converting all of his Crown Vics and pursuit vehicles to propane. But we're in first responder vehicles, package delivery, school, all of these with solutions from a lot of manufacturers to be able to provide that operation on propane autogas. Now, I'm not going to spend any time talking about Roush CleanTech and the Ford platform because David does that through his dealership, and he also takes care of the Freightliner custom chassis with the S2G, and I'm going to let him talk about that as well. But what I will say is we also have solutions for existing gasoline vehicles that can apply an aftermarket and overlay fuel system, a biofuel system. Alliance Autogas is a very popular platform for doing this, and they have hundreds of EPA certifications and vehicle platforms to do that. Icon North America is another biofuel aftermarket system that you can put on existing gasoline vehicles to immediately convert them over to running on propane. Campbell Parnell is also one. Now, they focus just on the Isuzu cab over, but do it quite well. LKQ is one of their bigger customers, and they do thousands of vehicles that deliver and recycled automobile parts. So they're in that. But by and far, school buses is the leader flagship for propane use in transportation here in these United States. All three school bus manufacturers have propane options for their buses. And today, we're very proud to say we have over 22,000 school buses operating on propane around these United States in over 1,000 school districts. And we're moving a little over 1.25 million students every day when all the schools are open, and I think we're getting there. But just to put it in perspective, a lot of people pull out pencils when I show this particular slide because just the disparity. If you were to outfit a Type C bus configured exactly the way you want, and it ended up being $100,000. This is just a comparison between various alternatives. The propane system would be about $6,000 more, about $34,000 more for the CNG version, but substantially more for the electric version. So how does that translate into a cost per mile? For each of these platforms, propane does do that with its lowest total cost of ownership. When you measure the cost of the energy, the cost of the bus, the life cycle of the bus, and how long you're going to keep it. Based on national averages of diesel and gasoline and natural gas, propane is the lowest. And now we've lined up with the school bus awards through the Volkswagen settlement is pretty indicative of that. The blue area here shows how many dollars have gone into school bus awards from that Volkswagen settlement. And the yellow area is the actual number of vehicles. Now I need to update this, David, because your counterparts up in South Carolina added another 235 propane school buses in the state that I live in, which is South Carolina. So I need to get these things adjusted, but it shows you the right side up equation that propane provides in that student transportation market. We can get a lot of buses deployed and make a huge difference in cleaning up and making it safe for children to go to and from school. So what else are we doing other than the school bus markets? Well, our sweetest spot is that class 3 through 7 medium duty space. These are the vehicles that have a high fuel consumption because of the substantially less cost that propane is from conventional fuels. The more that you displace, the more money that you're going to save, and also the more emissions that you're going to reduce. So we love that high volume fuel consumption, not just the first mile or last mile, but regional routes that are going, over 300 miles a day. So our three top favorite is that food and beverage delivery. Nestle Waters has over 1,000 of their water delivery trucks operating on propane. Everybody knows the Schwann's home delivery story of 4,000 vehicles operating on propane, even since the 1970s. The other market is the paratransit, not the big buses, but the smaller shuttles. Now, these shuttle buses, every county in these United States that conforms to the American with Disability Act has them. They're wheelchair access as well as passenger, and they're point to point. In other words, they pick people up at their homes, take them to their doctors and to where they need to go, and then back. So they go through quite a bit of fuel per month. Just the national average for school buses, put it in perspective, is 265 gallons a month, where these vehicles are actually going through about 600 gallons of fuel per month. In that cutaway and high capacity advantage, about 51,000 of these vehicles nationwide, and propane is fueling 14% of those today. I had one of them actually share some information with me not long ago because they were getting some quotes on the gasoline version, the propane version, and the electric version. And these were the quotes that he got for configuring that 12-passenger shuttle bus. My favorite, I have to admit, is actually in the parcel and package delivery. Frank used to be with UPS. He knows well the UPS use of propane in its package cars, and how FedEx Ground and DHL are using propane in their package. But one of the newcomers is actually the contractors for the United States Postal Service. And of the 92,000 routes that the Postal Service has across these United States, 70,000 of those routes are accomplished by independent contractors that are moving the mail between distribution centers and postal services, not that first mile, last mile, but everything in between. And they're taking care of this, and they're running 6.5, 7 days a week, day and night. The picture here is of Maccabee Trucking, and they operate 38 trips between Greenville, South Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina every night. They're moving that mail back and forth in these 26-foot box trucks, and they're averaging over 1,000 gallons of fuel a month. So you can see how much fuel cost savings they can get from that, as well as the emission reductions. Now, Bill's going to talk about more about infrastructure and how you do it in the state of Georgia, boots on the ground, and how he makes that happen through permitting and all that. But I'm just going to give you a 50,000-foot level view of some of the options that we have in that fueling infrastructure. City of Boston does over 400 buses with wet hosing every single night because they just don't have room for infrastructure, not for diesel, not for propane. And so this is how they fuel those trucks every single night, very efficiently, because of the space requirements. Sometimes we need to move a fleet, and propane is that portable. We can actually pick it up, move it, and reset it up. And because the generator that actually powers the pump runs on propane, this is a self-sustaining temporary fueling site. If you happen to get your vehicles before your infrastructure is set up, which usually doesn't happen, but sometimes it does, your propane marketer can set up this infrastructure right there at your place to take care of you until everything gets going. But when we get to implementing a fleet, we're going to have a standard private station starting off with 1,000 gallons there for maybe just a few vehicles, with your fuel management system integrated right into the dispenser. It's moving that fuel just as fast as it is for gasoline and diesel, 10 gallons a minute, and it takes up a very small footprint to get started. But as you grow, you can keep the same dispenser and just add more storage, behind it to increase the amount, and going from 1,000s to 4,000s and end on end here. So you can have two buses going all at the same time, all the way up to when you have hundreds of buses, you can go to 18, and you can go to 30,000 gallon systems to make your purchasing of that fuel very cost effective in large quantities. The dispensers of these things are moving fuel, and they are anywhere from just counting gallons to fuel management systems, all the way to convenience stores for consumers that are in there. They all have by the new code, they all have a quick connect, so push it on, push it off, and no gloves and eyewear anymore, because it's safe now to make that happen. Just to give you a comparison of that infrastructure cost, the equipment we had for that private station is, upwards of about $40,000 of equipment. And that can go from anywhere from, a couple of buses up to 50 buses. But, CNG, just for the 10 fixed hoses, is a little bit more expensive, and so is electric. But the important part of the propane is it's very scalable. Once you get started, you can just increase storage of it and not have the additional cost. The Department of Energy also has the outfield station locator. When you go outside of your infrastructure that you're putting at your place, because it's so cost effective to make happen. But I use the app on my phone all the time because I have a truck that runs on propane. And if I'm going to Pennsylvania or going to Richmond and going up through that way, I can find all of the places to fuel with propane along that way. The Department of Transportation's off-fuel corridors, these are the corridors for propane, and they're changing every day and being added to so that folks know exactly where they can drive and get fuel. So technology innovations, we're not standing still. We're developing new engines that are way more efficient and more powerful than before. Cummins actually is demonstrating a new engine that they developed, and they were quite surprised because it's actually more powerful than diesel in horsepower and torque, but substantially reducing greenhouse gases at the tailpipe because of that efficiency. We're also changing the fuel and how it's going. I told you we were going to talk about renewable propane just a little bit. A very low carbon intensity, inexpensive feedstock. We have a couple of different sources with renewable DME blended with propane, as well as wherever diesel, renewable diesel is built, we are a byproduct of that as well. But let's do a little bit of a greenhouse gas life cycle analysis. And we're not going to compare ourselves to diesel, but the standard today seems to be the cleanest thing out there is electric. So let's do a comparison to the electric grid and propane for a medium duty truck. The electric grid, of course, is made up of multiple energy sources that are producing that energy that we can actually plug in. There's coal, natural gas, biomass, petroleum. We have renewables that are going into the grid from nuclear and hydro and solar and wind. But when we add it all up, we get a carbon intensity for the national average for the grid, because you have to count the extraction of energies that are going into those power plants that are being distributed and actually, going from the building that's charging it. All of that adds up to 165 grams per megajoule of carbon intensity. So how does that translate in comparison to propane? Propane has an average carbon intensity of 79 nationwide. The grid, and you can see some states are cleaner than others with their grid, but the average is 165 for that carbon intensity. So let's do a little comparison here. If I have that medium duty box truck that I showed up on there, and it's driving 200 miles a day for a year, how much CO2 is that going to generate compared to a same electric truck that's being, the batteries are being charged from the grid? In that state of Georgia, this is just regular propane right now, that propane truck is actually going to be 122 tons of CO2 less than the state of Georgia's grid for that battery electric. Okay, so we're already doing very well there. But if we introduce the renewable propane, then it's actually 307 tons of CO2 less, because the carbon intensity of renewable propane is substantially less. So let's go to the year 2035. And we use our best blend of renewable propane, and we compare it to the best electric grid projections of everybody. In other words, that grid is 95% cleaned up and renewable. And I'm going to say battery life is going from 1,000 cycles to 5,000 cycles. Well, propane is not just a fuel for today or even for tomorrow, but long into our future, we're still extremely viable in reducing those greenhouse gases. The state of Georgia is going to be 76 tons of CO2 less than that battery electric charged medium duty truck driving 200 miles a day. Now, all of that math comes from these sources, and since this is recorded, I'll let you come back and look at those things, do a little fact check. Let's sum it all up. Medium duty is our sweet spot for propane, and we are about 15% on average, 15% more than a conventionally fueled vehicle. Okay, which is extremely less than most of the alternatives that are out there. We don't have to compromise on range. We're doing 300 plus miles. If you're getting a high capacity propane tank on the bus, you're going 400 miles. And we can do that in any weather. We can turn on the heater and the air conditioner and make it all good. The emission reductions, we kind of covered that so far, but I do want to cover the NOx emission comparisons. I was doing some things in California, so they asked me to do this comparison. The NOx emissions of that electric truck that is generated, although it might not be generated at the location of the truck, but the power plant that's charging that is producing 0.83 grams of NOx per mile, and our good old regular propane is only producing 0.44 grams of NOx per mile. So with all of that, you can go to propane.com and get a ton of information of how you can transition your fleet to a great alternative fuel, and that is propane autogas. So I am now going to turn it over to David because he's going to dive a little deeper into those vehicle solutions that you have to choose from. David, take it away, would you?
Thank you, Stephen. I really enjoy your presentations. I've heard them several times, and I always walk away learning something. It's great. You had mentioned that you'd worked with Jackson County. Jackson County is my home, and I saw those cars for the Sheriff's Department run here successfully for many, many years. I think they're still running them. My goal here today is to introduce you as what can I go buy from a typical dealership. My dealership is Peach State Truck Centers. Rachel, can you advance the slide? Thank you. Peach State Truck Centers was established in 1974 and has grown into one of the largest commercial truck dealership groups in the United States. Right now, we have 11 locations in Georgia and Alabama. Next slide. We offer a wide variety of products from leading OEMs such as Ford, Freightliner, Western Star, and Thomas Built Bus. Next slide. We're going to take a look at the Ford commercial vehicle propane options first, and I think you're going to be surprised how many of them there are. Next slide. For Ford, the commercial truck strategy is many unique vocations and many vehicle requirements. So one size doesn't fit all. And that's why Ford's collaborating with reliable QVMs or qualified vehicle modifiers. And we deliver a completed advanced fuel propane vehicle to you. In other words, we can take care of all of the upfit, including the tanks and any modifications such as the bodies that go on the vehicle. All of the Ford vehicles come with a gaseous prep package. And when we order the gaseous prep package, it's going to modify that engine to be ready for propane. In other words, hardened exhaust valve seats. Now, the tanks will actually be put on after the fact. It's interesting to note that Ford maintains the engine and powertrain limited warranty. It stays the same. It does not change. Next slide. We'll start with a basic transit cargo van. This is what you're going to see an electrician, plumber, etc. use for his day-to-day business. So if I'm an electrician, plumber, and I've got a fleet of these, I can put in a simple fueling infrastructure and take care of my entire fleet with propane. Next slide. On the same platform is a transit passenger wagon, used as it would suggest, basically a great big station wagon for hauling people using propane. Next slide. The E-Series cutaway chassis, you've probably remember these from airport shuttles, hotel shuttles, very common in use. Great application for propane. Next slide. Then the ever popular F-Series Super Duty pickup. Interesting to note that the F-Series pickup is the #1 selling vehicle in the United States. Not the #1 selling truck, but the #1 selling vehicle. And it is available, ready for propane. Next slide. We also sell it as a chassis cab. And so if you need a specialized box, be it a dump bed, workspace, etc., we can equip that and fuel it with propane. Next slide. And then the F650, F750 chassis cab with GVWR ratings all the way up to 33,000 pounds. I drove one of these yesterday, and they're an impressive vehicle. It's a heavy-duty truck. Next slide. And then the stripped chassis for parcel vans. So as you may see with a UPS or an Amazon van that's delivering packages to your house, this is the guts that goes underneath it. And again, ready to go with propane. Next slide. Next, I'm going to talk about the Freightliner S2G. This truck is built with GVWR ratings from 24,000 to 33,000 pounds. Next slide. This is going to be a little bit different than what we saw with the Ford, as this is built as a dedicated propane autogas. In other words, it never had a gasoline fuel tank on it. So it delivers an exceptionally low cost of operation and is designed for uses such as delivering propane. Next slide. We target anybody with this truck that is what we view as a good user of propane. Number one is propane delivery. Anyone interested in a low cost per mile vehicle up to 33,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. So that can be flatbeds, pickups, delivery boxes. It really favors high stop and go applications and high idle times, where high idle times can cause diesel particulate filter issues on a diesel engine. There's no DPF, there's no DPF to clean. So anybody that either has a centralized fuel system or wants a centralized fuel system, we see as a good target. And we can work with propane marketers such as Conger on the cost of the fuel and or installation of a centralized fuel system. Next slide. So this is a factory built truck that's not a conversion. Factory direct support 24/7. Freightliner is famous for its 24/7 product support. And all of the parts for this are going to be in our standard system. So it's not something outside the norm for us. And we use clean top of frame rails for easy body integration. Next slide. We offer two different engines. We offer an 8-liter engine. Next slide. That we call the drive force, that develops 339 horsepower and 495 foot-pounds of torque. Next slide. And an 8.8 liter. This is going to be a higher torque engine, as we'll see on the next slide, please. So now we're going to a larger displacement engine that's going to give us 270 horsepower, but 565 pounds-feet of torque. Very, very strong engine dedicated to propane. Next slide. As Steve said, one of the things that we see as the real great home for propane is in school buses. And we offer the Thomas-built school bus. And you're going to see a lot of similarities in what we offer in that school bus, what we just saw in the S2G, because they're built on the same production lines. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this may be a little dated statistic because according to PERC, we had 18,000 propane school buses and 1.1 million students in 930 school districts across the nation on propane buses. Quite an awesome number. Next slide. One of the things that we offer with Thomas is a wide availability to match what a customer needs in a school district. So various wheelbases and various models, but as you can see, offered with either engine, either the 8-liter or the 8.8. Next slide. Here's a picture of what they look like, and as you can see, they're very clean engine designs, and as they're installed in the buses, easy to service. Next slide. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the two. And as you can see, where it says agility and PSI, these are the people that actually provide those engines to Thomas. The different horsepowers at different RPMs, and different torque ratings. And so we've got the solution that's going to either give you a gasoline engine type drivability with the 8-liter or diesel-like drivability with the 8.8. Next slide. We offer different fuel capacities to suit what a school district needs. And one advice here is, as you're looking at a fuel tank size with propane, remember you've got to have some space for the gas in it. And so an 87.6 DGE tank is 70 DGE usable. Next slide. One of the things that we do that's different on the bus is we splay the frame rails, and that's where we kind of widen them towards the back to put a nice protective cradle around our propane tanks. Next slide. We offer them with either a 2300 Allison with the 8-liter or 2500 Allison with the 8.8 in either air brakes or hydraulic brakes. Next slide. The engine maintenance schedule is shown here, and to follow up on Steve's point, it's very, very simple. We have no SCR catalyst, no diesel particulate filter to fool with, very small investment for any kind of special tools. Oil changes at 5,000 miles, 200 hours, every 6 months, in some cases every year. Next slide. Great warranty and aftermarket support for our drive force engines, 5 years unlimited mile warranties, 7-year unlimited mile warranty on the transmissions. Next slide. So that was a very quick run through, but what the takeaway I hope that you have from this is, wow, there's a whole lot of trucks. I can just walk up to the dealership at Peach State Trucks and say, I'd like a propane version of this. And we can help work with you to configure it to exactly what you need. At this point, I'm concluding, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Matt.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Steve. Those were great presentations. I appreciate both of you, and I appreciate everybody letting me have a few minutes here to talk about just a little smaller engine when as far as propane mowers go and landscaping. I just want to highlight a few things here, and then I'll touch base a little bit on power gen. So as we move on to the next slide here, you can see some of the current challenges for landscape contractors. And really, you know, if you're going to do something, it's got to make sense financially. So, you know, some of their challenges would be cost of doing business, your daily operating costs, your seasonal labor issues. Equipment is ever so expensive, and it's only getting more expensive. And then in some markets where especially in markets like this where you mow year round, in a lot of places, your market is oversaturated, and that only drives your pricing margins down. You've got different emission restrictions. You've got a lot of pressure to lower your emission restrictions, because there's just nothing great about a small gasoline engine that runs on a lawnmower that's very clean. So when you convert these things to propane, it shores things up quite a bit. And then downtime, you know, is obviously a revenue killer, whether it's maintenance, whether it's out of fuel, whether if you're trying to go electric and you've got downtime for charging. So there's tons of revenue killer in downtime. As we move on to the next slide here, the how propane is going to really help you as far as, you know, what it brings to the table is obviously, you know, it's got to make sense. So reducing your fuel cost, you're going to see substantial savings in propane over gasoline or diesel for that matter in larger mowers. But the gasoline cost is ever so rising, where propane is holding strong. You've got your emission profile is certainly lower with propane, and that just shores you up for quality of bids, where, a lot of municipalities and schools and college campuses really want to do something different, have an alternative fuel, and this just opens you up for all kinds of certain bids. And then ozone action days are certainly something that is a hot topic, not only in the state of Georgia, but really all over the country. And you find that sometimes 20 to 30 days a year could be an ozone action days, and that only lowers your productivity, when you're depending on that work every day. So another benefit would obviously be faster refueling. I'll get into a little bit more of that and how we refuel these mowers, and then even some on-site refueling options. So as we move on to the next slide, Steve showed this. It's just a cost comparison of really what propane's done over more than a decade, where it's always just held its own. It's been a go-to fuel. It's lower in cost, so you can do the math very easy. When you see trends like $1 a gallon difference, you really see and can do the math quickly in your head of what the cost savings are here. So as we move on to the next slide, reduced emission profile, and really that's the hot topic, and Steve showed a similar slide to this as well too. But I want you to think about not only what it does for the contractor, what it does for the customer, what it does for the environment, and what it does for us as a whole, but think about the person that's actually running the mower. Think about these workers that are standing over top of a small engine. They're standing over top of the exhaust system all day, and we've talked to them. We've gotten some really good feedback from them. They say, hey, the power's no concern. The power's there with this propane mower. But what is even more compelling than any of that is when they really talk about their quality of life, that they have less headaches, that they have less smell on their clothes at the end of the day. And all of these things, they start talking about it. They have more energy, they can work longer hours, and all these things start to make us really scratch our head and say, why aren't you converting to propane? It only makes sense. It's cheaper in cost for your fuel. It's lowering your emission profile, and it's healthier for your workers, and the performance is there. So there's to me, there's no real aha moment when we're talking about converting these mowers. As we move on to the next slide, I wanted to talk about productivity a little bit, because that's a real hot button for contractors. You've got to have gas cans on your trailer. You've got to send somebody to a gas station early in the morning and sometimes twice a day to fill these gas cans. There can be fuel theft. There could be downtime. Where with refueling a propane powered mower, it's very simple. Sometimes they go on the back of the mower, sometimes they go on the side of the mower. It's a low waist level lift for the cylinder to go. Propane on forklifts, they've been doing this type of refueling for many years. It's been very efficient. It works very well. There's no spillage involved with it. There's no downtime involved with it. You simply grab a full tank, remove the empty tank, and put the fuel tank back on. It's so simple. There's no going to the gas station. There's no giving your credit card to somebody to fill up gas cans. There's none of those things involved here. As we move on to the next slide, we've got a couple refueling options. If you're a large landscaper or a small landscaper or a city or whatever it may be, you've got options. I know in the city of Kansas City, we converted about 26 mowers to propane. They had several locations where they kept their mowers, and it made sense to set cages at each one of those locations and then just put them on a keep fill where we would replenish those cages with mower cylinders. The mower cylinders, we call them green tops in the propane marketing world. They're really similar to a forklift propane cylinder. The only difference is they've got a kind of a floating ballast in the tank. A forklift just stays real stationary. It's flat. There's no real hills or inclines to go up and down, but a mower's different. It's going through ditches, it's going up hills, it's on long end grades to where it's, it could run out of fuel. So these tanks are specialized to make sure that these tanks operate and perform well with the application that they're on. So if you've got a smaller fleet, you may have cages and you may have 5 or 6 mowers at one location. You need a cage. You simply just take those bottles off, you put them on your trailer or wherever you're going for the day, you strap them in, and you've got them for the day. If you've got a larger fleet and you're saying, hey, I would just like to fill, I was a propane marketer at one time and I sold to these companies in the large companies where they say, hey, we just want to refill our tanks. You get obviously a little bit better of a margin on price if you've got 500 or 1,000 gallons of bulk propane being delivered. So you could fill your own cylinders and even get cheaper fuel that way. It does require a little bit of maintenance, but typically your propane marketer will train you. They will set the equipment. They will take care of all those infrastructure needs for you to allow you to fill your own cylinders. So both very cool options, very easy options to think about. As we move on to the next slide, you may have certain preferred brands that you want. You may have, I like Toro, or I like John Deere or Kubota or whoever I like, or Skag. You have options. Just about any mower out there can be converted to propane. So tons of options. As we move on to the next slide, I would encourage anybody that's thinking about converting their mowers or any fleet or any application, there's plenty of resources at propane.com, and I'll talk about more of those as we move on here. But the mower calculator is great. It allows you to put in some of the numbers that you may have and really show you the cost comparison for converting your fleet to propane. As we move on here to the next slide, there's also a dealer locator. If you're having trouble in your area and you're wanting to find a locator, you can certainly go to propane.com and find somebody to take care of your business as well too. So as we move on to the next slide, so I just wanted to touch base a little bit on power gen. Power gen is relevant for our conversation here today. When we talk about prime and port applications and different applications, even if you use power generation as a prime application, we can look at 200 kilowatts all the way up to 1 gig. You could see it in a large port application where the ship is docking, maybe a container ship or a port ship that wants to cut power completely and be able to completely power that ship as it's docked. That's diesel replacement right there, typically. So all good applications. We look at backup. Backup is more of a residential or a small commercial when we think of those terms, as far as a 5 to 20 kW range. Remote probably fits well into our conversation today when we talk about telecom space. We talk about law enforcement, radio backup. Those things really resonate. These are diesel replacement options in propane. You'll see these in remote areas to really power those cell towers or radio towers in case of a power outage. Obviously, having that telecommunication and that radio option backup is key. Mobile power generation, you see more and more discussion on mobile power generation, whether it be now you've even seen EV charging stations for electric vehicles even. I know that's surprising to a lot of people, but you think of charging stations for mobile propane power generation, construction, concerts and events could also be mobile power. So there's tons of applications for that. And then you've got combined heat and power operations for power generation. I would encourage anybody that's interested in CHP to go to propane.com. There's a CHP portion of our website there that's dedicated to CHP, which is really interesting. And then even into the power generation landing page as well on propane.com, I think is always a good space to explore some of these things as well too. So tons of different applications, I'm sorry, for power generation. And as we move into the future, is just kind of where we're at right now and what we look at and different applications, it was interesting to see to me recently. A marketing partner of ours informed me that almost 24,000 searches occur every month for prime, backup, remote, or mobile power generation. That's almost 800 searches a day that are being sought after for power generation. So it's pretty exciting. You know, I live in a state just south of Georgia and Florida where, you know, having backup power is always nice to have. So you just got to think about all the options that are available out there. That's all I had today. I appreciate you just letting me share a few things with you. I'm going to turn it over to Bill Moore. Bill Moore is the alternative fuel sales manager with Conger LP Gas. And Bill, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity. Having listened to all of my previous presenters, the one common denominator that you're going to find with all of this is that they all work great. All of the systems work great, but if you don't have the right propane marketer, the person to get you the fuel, then you're going to run into issues down the road. So it's extremely important that as you search out the proper application, the proper bus, the proper lawnmower, whatever it is, you need to have a conversation with a propane marketer that has a footprint in the auto gas market. I've been on board with Conger now just over 10 years, and we're based in Tifton, Georgia, down in the south, cover about 30 counties, and we've made a portion of what we do every day in dealing with the alternative fuel market. Now, we're a little different down here in that we're a large agriculture market. We haven't really talked about some of those things, but we do not only the lawnmowers for landscapers and school buses, and then some of our own fleets, not only our own fleet, where we've got about 25 of our vehicles that all run on propane, but we've got other companies around us that do that also. But I've also got farmers down here that use propane irrigation motors instead of a diesel motor or electric. All of that to be said is that you've got to have a marketer that understands what your needs are. You know, if you're a landscaper and you've only got 3 or 4 lawnmowers, you're not near you don't have near the requirements of someone that's got 15 or 20, or that you're a small market. So again, like they've talked about before, we can help fuel it in a small cage application. We can put in an application where you've got a motor and you've got a pump, and all we do is take care of filling the 500-gallon tank. But as we move into like a school bus application on the picture that you see here, those are 4 1,000-gallon tanks that are set up for a school bus application. This particular school system has 22 school buses currently running on propane. And one of the things that we've been able to do is we started out with a 1,000-gallon tank, because they only started out with 2 or 3 buses to start with, but they've continually added school buses over the past few years. Now they're up to 22. Well, one of the original conversations that I had with this school district, and it's one that I have with any one of them that I talk to, school districts themselves, in most applications, they do their own lawn mowing. So they had 10 lawnmowers, 0 turn on site, that in our effort to move to their school buses, well, I made the pitch to them that I would go ahead and convert all of their lawnmowers in that same application. So now they've got 10 lawnmowers that run on propane. They've got 22 school buses. You know, this school district here will save close to $100,000 this year just in fuel cost. What you're looking at here is it's Sumter County Schools down here in South Georgia. This gentleman is using the Quick Connect model that lets you fuel a bus. You can't not connect properly. If you don't, if you hook it on there and it's done improper, you can't fuel the bus. But in this application, you don't have to have gloves. You don't have to have eyewear, and it's really made it a lot simpler for the school district. One of the choices and things that we did in having to overcome the objection was fueling this bus. I've got ladies and gentlemen, older folks that are fueling these buses, and they're used to fueling a diesel bus. But we've made this as simple as possible, and this is now a standard in the industry. So that whether it's here or Texas or Alabama, if a school buys this type of bus, then they're going to have the quick connect. So it's made as simple as possible. It fills just as quickly, so they're not losing any downtime. Their mileage comparisons, most all of our buses now are using the 100-gallon tanks that Thomas, Bluebird, IC all have. You're going to get the 300 to 400 mile range with a full tank of gas. But all of that to be said, if you've got to deal with a marketer that knows what they're doing. There's roughly 120 propane dealers here in the state of Georgia, but there's only about 15 of us that actually do this on a day-to-day basis, that know what we need in the pumping strategy to make sure that this bus fills properly. And so as you research that opportunity, you can reach out to the Georgia Propane Gas Association. You can reach out to me. My contact information will be there available later. But we can steer you toward those options that you have. And that's extremely important to make this work successfully. Once you get the bus, once you get the vehicle, once you get the lawnmower, if you don't have the proper partner to make sure that it stays full, or if your buses go on the road, a lot of times what we're able to do with our contracts with our school buses, if they take off from South Georgia and want to go to Atlanta, question always becomes, where am I going to be able to fill up? Well, there are options now on the road, the Flying J truck stops, that I can always pull in and use it to fill up a diesel. That option is still there for propane. But one of the unique opportunities that propane has is if you take a group, let's say to the Dome or whatever, and want to play football, we coordinate with a local provider that will actually drive up to your school bus while you're playing football or baseball. We'll fill it up while you're still there. So those opportunities are there, but it's the knowledge from the propane marketer that makes it available. So vitally important as you research it to make sure you've got a marketer that helps do that. So great options to look forward to. But in doing that, just make sure that you reach out to the right marketer to make all of this successful. But I think as a cost benefit analysis, you'll find that propane, without a doubt, is probably the most efficient option for you to consider. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Sam Ham with Yancey Bus.
Here we go. Now, try to get my camera readjusted because I said I was looking down. Now I'm looking up, so we'll work with it. Had a lot of great information from the presenters before me, and what I would like to do is basically just share my journey, my story with propane, if I may. Like I said, I'm Sam Ham, and I've spent the past 25 years in the school bus world. So my school bus journey really began as I began a new life in 1996. I started driving a school bus for Fulton County Schools. You're getting ahead of me. Back up on that slide. And one of the best decisions that I ever made. So over the next 19 years, I worked my way or conned my way from that driver's seat through many different roles up to the executive director's seat in the winter of 2015. I retired in May of 2020, but then I was pressed back into service as the interim senior executive director over at Cobb County Schools in October of 2020. And upon completion of my assignment at Cobb in March, I was fortunate to join Yancey Bus Sales as their alternative fuels specialist. If you'll notice, I provided a map of basically really the Fulton School District, because you look at Fulton County, There's a North Fulton, and there's that red blotch right in the middle that says APS, and that's Atlanta Public Schools. And then the South Fulton. So Atlanta Public is a different district altogether and kind of dissects or cuts the county right in half. So we have to operate in Fulton County Schools as a North Fulton, as a South Fulton, which makes sense hopefully here in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay. You know, I was one of those guys that really, I was very comfortable in my transportation life. I enjoyed good support and adequate budget to really operate from. But the Fulton County Schools Chief Operations Officer, he sent me to a Council of Great City Schools conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that was back in April of 2016. Now, I'd spent a lot of time basically in the 1980s in Charlotte, so I was kind of happy to revisit my old stomping grounds. The first morning session was about propane school buses at this event I went to. Now, I'm going to tell you, I had zero, and I mean zero interest in that session. I really intended to blow the thing off and not go at all. I could revisit some of the old uptown Charlotte area and see where I used to run around a little bit. But my conscience got the better part of me, and it kicked in, and I was a good boy, and I attended the session. Now, I will tell you that the session was a nicely done infomercial that day. It was not bad. But here's where it got very, very interesting and real for me. There was a Q&A activity at the end of the conclusion of that infomercial. And again, this was the Council of Great City Schools. So you had districts represented, transportation directors from the largest districts throughout the country. And several directors stood up during the Q&A session, and they started sharing their experiences about propane buses. I mean, you had people from Denver, Colorado, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, several from Texas, Florida, etc. And every one of them had only great things to report. Not one bad thing was mentioned at all. I heard about the ease of getting fuel, the cost of fuel, much lower maintenance costs, reliability, cold weather starting, cranking, and on and on and on. I live here in the metro Atlanta area. I told you I represented at the time Fulton County Schools, where it very rarely gets down to a critical temperature where the diesel gels up, et cetera. But I will tell you, anytime that it got below prediction overnight of below 16 degrees, we called in our staff, our mechanics, and ready to crank up the diesel buses so they'd be good and ready to roll in the morning. Well, I kept hearing from these people again, Minneapolis, Denver, that when it got cold, I mean, in Minneapolis, give me a break. Below zero, these buses were firing up without an issue. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So again, there wasn't one bad thing was saying, and I just found the whole process fascinating. Well, that same COO was at this event, and he knew where to find me at the end of the day. And sure enough, he found me at the watering hole, and he kind of came up and he wanted to know my thoughts of day one. Now you got to understand, this man knows me. And he knew that even though I'd previously been invited to visit the Ford Motor plant in Windsor, Canada, and the Roush facility in Detroit, and many other manufacturing facilities, I really had zero interest in doing any of those things. I was comfortable in my little diesel transportation world. But after that event I nearly blew off, I now wanted to go. So I went to up north in the very early fall, and I returned with a determination to move Fulton County Schools from a diesel-based fleet to a Bluebird propane powered one. Oh, his reaction. Rachel, if you hit the button, please. That was his reaction. Okay, next slide, please. You know, if you're going to buy propane buses, as my predecessors had talked about, you may want to figure out how you're going to fuel these things. Well, in August of 2016, Fulton County Schools, we issued a RFP for propane fueling station. Now, if I'm going to convert the fleet, I'm going to go big and let's just get it done and get on with it. So we wanted a 30,000 gallon tank in our North Fulton and something temporary in the south side or the south shop is that facility was going to be going through a redo or remake. But at the end of the day, when it was all done, I needed a 30,000 gallon system there with 8 dispensers on each side. So it's important to know also that school districts, Fulton was not different, did not have to put up one dime of capital outlay for any of these fueling facilities. This was paid for up front by our propane provider. Now, we all knew, it's no secret, that they do have a markup or an add-on for the Autogas to offset that investment. But again, we didn't have to put out one dime for this infrastructure. And our price per gallon to this day still is significantly lower than diesel. I must also say that the ease of finding fuel, I know talking to some of my fellow directors during this last, when the pipeline interruption happened, there were a lot of people sweating, getting diesel, getting gasoline, but propane was flowing. It was not a problem at all. But anyway, in December of 2016, a contract was awarded, and this work was completed on time for the August 2017 school opening. Next slide, please. So here's kind of a summary of the Fulton County story of propane-powered buses. That annual growth and some of the additional dollars that we got to help move us down the road. We opened up with our first 90 buses, and after that, went heavily after every grant dollar that we could find or squeeze. It's been mentioned earlier about the DERA, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, and that's where, quite frankly, where we found nice money. And the federal government has DERA grants and DERA rebates. The Georgia EPD has a state DERA grant as well. And the state DOE is also incentivized alt fuel buses with support for all 3 of the manufacturers for propane engines, as well as a $100,000 incentive for electric bus. But Fulton County schools grew our fleet in just over 4.5 years to 440 propane buses with the help of $7.8 million in additional grant and rebate funds. And there's a summary of those dollars and when they came, how we got it. Next slide, please. Okay, as of my retirement in May of 2020, Fulton County Schools at that time was the top public school district in the nation and Canada. With 400, then that picture is actually a picture of a plaque that's in the Roush, sitting outside the Roush conference room in Detroit. So at that time, there was the top 10 in the country according to Roush. And there's a summary. Fulton County Schools, they cranked 753 daily buses for routes. 440 of them are propane powered, so 58% of the daily crank was propane powered. And again, the total grants that we got after, Fulton got after, was $7.8 million. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I joined Cobb County Schools as the interim senior executive director there in October. So it made for a little brief retirement. Got a little grief about that earlier from some of my colleagues. But when I joined in October, Cobb had 9 propane-powered buses, and we finally started rolling and providing transportation in October. In the ensuing months of my employment at Cobb, I went on another see what we could find for federal dollars. So we applied for and we were awarded a federal DERA rebate. We took advantage of the Georgia rebate, or that incentive to use alternative fuels, and we were awarded the Georgia EPD DERA grant in the amount of $535,000. So all total, Cobb County supplemented their 2021 bus purchases with an additional $895,000 and will grow to a 61 propane powered bus fleet this fall. Now, obviously, again, people have mentioned savings, and I just want to mention a couple of numbers that I think are very significant, because when you're talking about a school system, when it comes time to do your annual budget, one of the first places they love to come to find money is from your transportation department, because we are normally large and spend a significant amount of money. Well, with 440 buses at Fulton County Schools, I was getting around that $3,500 per bus savings. Quick math will tell you that's $1.5 million there that we were saving. So again, when they would come to me for some cuts or savings, now I didn't offer up that $1.5 million, but I knew I had a little bit in my back pocket. So when you offer up $250,000 or $500,000, you're a hero, and they go on to look to other things. But that is additional money that can go back to the classroom, and that's what every school district is looking for. What can we put in the classroom to educate the children? Cobb County should be, if his numbers hold like we did at Fulton, that's another $200,000 just in the next year, along with their school buses. So, my role now, as I finish my assignment at Cobb, is in join Yancey, is basically to just assist school districts where I can with the move to alternative fuels. I don't hug trees and I don't eat wild hickory nuts and things like that, but I simply believe that diesel as we know it and its use as the mainstay of the school bus fleet is quickly coming to an end and going to change pretty quickly. That's my story. So I think I turn this back over to Mr. Morris. Frank?
Hey, thanks a lot, Sam. I appreciate that, and appreciate your journey and how you laid that out for us. Of course, pretty exciting to see Fulton with 440 school buses and Cobb at 38. So thank you very much. Rachel and I are going to monitor the questions to see if we've got any coming in. I've got a couple just to kick off, and I'll go back to Steve. Steve, you did a great job laying out all the applications, and Matt, you did as well from the lawn mowing landscaping perspective. The range of miles per gallon, the equivalency of getting miles per gallon on a diesel engine or a gas engine to the propane engine. I know you guys mentioned 100-gallon tanks, but is it comparable in miles per gallon?
No, actually, just like gasoline compared to diesel, both fuels have a different energy content. So diesel having, a heavier density, weighs about 7.2 pounds per liquid gallon. Gasoline weighs about 6.1 pounds per liquid gallon. There's a different energy density that's in there. Propane weighs 4.2 pounds per liquid gallon. And so there's a different energy density to it. So just like you're going to have to use more gasoline compared to diesel doing the same amount of work, and likewise for propane. So the miles per gallon, yes, are going to be less. But what we count is the cost per mile.
Right.
In other words, if you're using 10 gallons of diesel to do your work and you have to use 13.5 gallons of propane to do the same amount of work, how much is the 10 gallons of diesel costing compared to the 13.5 gallons of propane? And that's where Sam was making all of those savings.
Right.
If you just look at miles per gallon, you're going to go, oh, that doesn't help me. But when you analyze the cost per mile, because of the substantial reduction in the cost of that propane autogas when we're dispensing it, that's where that savings comes in.
Thank you. And what about and I apologize if I missed this, the rebate on the purchase of propane per gallon at the end of the year, the federal incentive to use propane? What's that figure at?
Sure. Right now, that's at 36 cents, okay? 36 and some change. But I'd like to redirect that to Sam, because even though that is an incentive program that started back in 2006, with bipartisan support from Congress each time that's done that. But sometimes they've delayed so much in doing that incentive, it's turned into a reward instead of an incentive. An incentive is something that you put out there ahead of time so people know what savings they're going to have. But unfortunately, the way Congress has worked this, it's usually an after the fact. And so fleets like Sam has been rewarded. But Sam, you being a representative of a non-tax paying institution, with a school district, you're not paying that fuel tax on the fuel that's going in your school buses, but yet you're able to get that money back in a check form. Can you tell everybody how that worked?
Yeah, what we did, and you're right, it wasn't after the fact. You have to wait on Congress, see if are they going to make it available this year? So the first thing is, and I heard in the infomercial that I talked about in Charlotte, that was part of the equation and all that, but I never counted it because I just, if they don't approve it and I've put it in the budget, now I got to find something. So long story short, and I, as y'all get to know me, I love to just relate my stories. One of the big challenges for a school district is finding bus drivers. What's that got to do with propane? Well, for us, how do you get bus drivers? And I'm talking about pre-COVID. So this was all, you just got to pay them. If they're not going to drive for $15 an hour, they're going to drive for $17 an hour. If they're going to drive for $17 an hour, what's the magic number? Well, we threw out at Fulton, okay, well, let's start at $20 an hour. Now you start to get some attention. Well, how are you going to fund this? That's a chunk of change. That's a lot of money. And I will tell you, we were getting into a world of hurt right as we were going into that final, into the fall and the Christmas type season right before we got shut down for COVID. But anyway, I had substantial amount of driver openings, and our talent department, our HR department, well, what are you going to do? How are we going to get these people? Well, okay, $20 an hour. Well, how are we going to fund this? Well, I just had done all the ciphering for the this magic rebate, and so I was like, well, gentlemen, I'm due a check for $590,000, and that's how we're going to. That's my kick in for funding this. Well, they went to our Board of Education, and they approved the raise, and again, before they locked down for COVID, we went from about 75 drivers short to we had a full complement of drivers. So to me, propane was the gift that just kept on giving for our district and helping
Hey,
fund
that's
those things.
a great story. Thank you, Sam. Folks, I hope you realize that you got everybody on this webinar to be able to dip your foot into the propane world, if you will, because you've got folks like David and Peach State Trucks that are able to sell you whether it's a Ford or a Freightliner or Thomas built bus, and you've got Bill and his network of propane providers across the state to be able to help you fuel those buses or other equipment. I appreciate what Matt said about the lawn mowing equipment and the fact with these green tops. I guess you could attribute the health benefit of those folks that are working behind those lawnmowers and so forth. Those green tops. Just real quick, Matt. The ability to put one of those tanks on a lawnmower, is that the equivalent of a 5, 10, 15-gallon gas tank on that lawnmower?
So it certainly is close. So there's two different size tanks typically on a on a forklift. There's a 33.5 and there's a 43.5, and the 33 is right at 8 gallons and the 43 is at 10 gallons. So typical ride-on zero turn mower is about a 10-gallon tank. So you're not far off. It really depends on what you want to lift and what you want to be able to put on the mower. Those 33-pound cylinders, aluminum cylinders, green tops with propane in them is just right over that 50-pound mark. So you know, it really depends on what you want. But typically, if you've got the cylinders on hand and you've got them on your trailer, it's no issue at all.
That's great. And Bill, I appreciate what you shared with us with Sumter and when you started selling them buses or sold on buses, and they started out with 2 and then they've grown to 22 buses, I believe.
They'll start
and the fact that you were able to, the fact that you were able to tie in that lawnmower equipment, did that 36 cents per gallon award, as Steve referred to it, as not an incentive but a reward, did that play into that discussion at all? And I'll throw this out because it's a question from the audience. Is that available only to fleets, or would it be available to individuals as well?
First part of the question, no, it really didn't play. Yes, it was mentioned in the early discussions that it was available, but the following year was not going to be. So it was great to have, knowing that it's out there, but we could prove the fuel numbers up front without the incentive. And you know, for them to make that change, or for anybody to make an alternative fuel change, they love the fact that it's green. That's really, I'm afraid to say, it's a side benefit. But they got to look at the cost effectiveness, whether it's a conversion or where it's a new purchase. And with the propane use, you could prove that it was effective to do that up front. And then the other side benefits came in there with the cleanliness and the quietness and the other things. So it didn't really play a major role, but it has been nice to have. I know it's been approved through the end of this year. Haven't heard anything about what it'll do going into the next year.
All right, very good. And of course, we've got a new administration, and so the funding that they are doing around alternative fuels is pretty amazing. So a lot of opportunities there. Just from what we're seeing from a Clean Cities perspective, the grant dollars that are being offered for all fuels seems to be getting funded maybe at a little bit greater amounts. So if you're a member of Clean Cities, you're a stakeholder, we make that information available when grants become available. So another incentive to think about joining your Georgia Clean Cities Coalition. I'm going to give everybody just a real quick closing comments from anyone that would like to. And David, we'll start with you, and then we'll wrap this up. David.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope the takeaway was that propane works and you can buy it today. It's not something on the horizon. It's ready to go. Stephen?
Well said. Well said. I appreciate, Frank, the opportunity to do all this. And anytime someone has a question, the Propane Education Research Council is here to ask, and propane.com has a tremendous amount of information. But if you need help any navigating this, or you have a specific one, pick up the phone. That's a mobile number for me, and give me a shout. We're all about educating folks on learning this process and how to make it most effective for them.
Matt?
Yeah, ditto for me, really. I mean, if you go to propane.com, there's a ton of information, not only for our mower calculator, but also in the power generation. If you're wanting to learn more about CHP, there's a good space to learn more about that. There's a power gen landing page. And then again, that's my email and my cell number. So if you've got any questions at all, I was a propane marketer for years. So I know quite a bit about the propane industry. So if you've got any, questions about, tank placement or how many tanks I need and how do I figure that stuff out, I can steer you in the right direction. I could, obviously a propane marketer would be better to come out and be able to look at your space and tell you what you need to do. But to David's point earlier, to Bill's point earlier about finding the right marketer is great. You always want to have somebody come out and take a look at your space and see really what you're doing, and how to best service your needs.
Thanks, Matt. And Sam, thanks for mentioning the grants as well in your presentation, Sam, but any closing comments?
Yeah, again, I just can't say how much to me propane is that gift that just keeps on giving. And anyone that's in the school bus world, whether it's my friends over at Peach State with their fine buses, or Rush Trucking with the IC bus, or Yancey with our Bluebird, I think it's a great addition for any school system. I think school systems need to be looking and exploring alternative fuels, because I firmly believe it's coming, and coming rapidly. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And before I turn over to Bill for any closing comments, just a note on the contact board. I don't want you all I know you're going to blow up my phone thinking you're getting in touch with me, but you'll notice that that's also Steve Whaley's phone number. That's my fault, so I apologize about that. But we'll correct that on the final that we post to the Clean Cities website. So Steve, if you get any of my phone calls, I apologize. My number is 770-408-8628. And with that, we'll and want to thank Rachel for helping us with this presentation behind the scenes. And Bill will give you the final comments.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And I think any of us in the propane industry, to make it work, we know we've got to make it as seamless as possible. We want to make it as easy as possible, because it is a challenge sometimes for people. It's a different fueling source, even though we're doing the same thing. But having the right partner, whether it's Steve and Matt at PERC, myself with the Georgia Propane Gas Association, Frank with Clean Cities, all of the alternative fuel sources have their place. Of course, we specialize on the propane side, but we also recognize there is other opportunities. So we're here to help you in any of those spaces.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Thanks to all of our presenters and everybody that joined us, and have a great Thursday. See ya.
Thanks, Frank.